Inside room 12, a young black girl sat frozen on the bed, her backpack open, her breath shallow, her hands gripping a small silver cross. Naomi Carter was just 15, but the man who promised to protect her had just sold her. Through the thin motel wall, she heard his voice, laughing, counting cash. Then came footsteps, heavy, male, getting closer. Naomi's world shrank to the size of that flickering light, her heart beat louder than the storm outside. And then, the sound changed, engines, dozens of them. Roaring, growing, shaking the ground like thunder rolling through the night. Headlights cut through the rain as 97 bikers swarmed the motel, their leather jackets glinting under lightning. Justice was on its way, and hell itself was about to knock on the wrong door. Before we go any further, what would you have done if you were Naomi? Comment below before the story unfolds, and make sure to subscribe, because the next story is one you don't want to miss. They say every storm begins with a whisper, and for Naomi Carter, it started the day her stepfather stopped saying her name. At first, it was subtle. He'd call her girl instead of Naomi, burden instead of daughter. Then the whispers turned into silence, and silence turned into something far darker. Naomi was 15, a bright student who once dreamed of becoming a nurse, the kind of girl who helped her teachers clean up after class and read bedtime stories to the neighbor's toddler. But after her mother's sudden passing, everything familiar vanished like dust in sunlight. Her stepfather, Carl Denson, inherited not just her home, but her custody. To the world, he looked like a grieving widower, quiet and polite. But behind closed doors, grief rotted into greed. He sold the furniture first, then the family car, and slowly Naomi realized she was next. At school, she stopped smiling. Her once neat braids went unkept. Her grades slipped. Teachers noticed, but no one asked. That's the cruel thing about quiet suffering. It hides best in plain sight. By the time Carl pulled up to that worn-down roadside motel, Naomi already knew something was wrong. The way his hands trembled on the steering wheel, the way he kept glancing in the rearview mirror. It wasn't nervousness. It was guilt. When they entered the lobby, the clerk gave a strange look, not at Carl, but at Naomi. And in that look, she felt seen for the first time in months. Not as a daughter, but as prey. Carl paid cash one night, room 12. He told Naomi to wait while he made a phone call. She sat on the bed, backpack beside her, clutching the only thing her mother left behind. A small silver cross necklace that had once hung from a hospital rearview mirror. That night, while rain streaked down the motel window, she finally understood. Carl wasn't protecting her. He was trading her. But here's the part that no one could ever explain, the miracle that followed. Because while one man planned to destroy her life, somewhere miles away, another group of men with roaring engines and leather jackets, were about to save it. Not out of duty, not out of law, but because of a single phone call that would ripple through 97 hearts. A call that came from a gas station attendant. The same one Carl brushed off earlier, laughing as he lied that Naomi was just his niece. The man saw the fear in her eyes, and when the storm began to roll in, he made the call that would change everything. What those bikers were about to do that night wasn't charity. It was vengeance. The kind that only men who've lost sisters, daughters, and mothers to monsters like Carl could understand. Because for them, this wasn't just about one girl. It was about every girl who never got rescued in time. The rain was relentless that night. It drummed against the motel roof in uneven rhythms, a soundtrack of dread and destiny colliding. Inside room 12, Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. Carl's voice seeped through the thin bathroom door, low and hushed as he spoke on the phone. She didn't need to hear every word to understand what was happening. She heard enough. The words "cash ready" and "no police" echoed louder than thunder. Naomi's pulse raced. She stared at the clock. 10:17 p.m. Her mind scrambled for a plan. The window was too small. The door was locked from outside. Her phone had no signal. Hopelessness pressed down like the humidity in that tiny room. But outside, hope was already roaring down the highway. 27 miles away, a biker named Dean Riker sat at the edge of a bar counter, halfway through a coffee gone cold. He wasn't the type of man people approached. Rough beard, road-worn face, leather vest covered in patches. But when his phone buzzed, he saw a message from a number he didn't recognize. Motel on Route 6. Girl in danger. Room 12, stepdad, please hurry. For a split second, he thought it was a prank, until the photo came through. Blurry, rain-streaked, but clear enough. A girl, terrified. Dean didn't ask questions. He just said one word: brothers. Within minutes, engines ignited like thunder in unison. Headlights pierced the rain-soaked night. One call turned into 20. 20 turned into 97. From state lines to county borders, the message spread like wildfire among men who once called themselves outlaws. But tonight rode for something sacred. They weren't coming to fight for justice. They were coming to deliver it. Back at the motel, Carl stepped out of the bathroom, phone still in hand, eyes red and manic. He told Naomi to stay quiet, his voice cracking between command and guilt. He paced the room, chain-smoking, rehearsing lies for whoever was coming to meet him. Outside, the rain softened, replaced by a sound that didn't belong in the storm. A deep, rhythmic growl. Engines, at first just one, then two, then dozens. Naomi's head lifted. Carl froze mid-step. The parking lot lights flickered as if the night itself was holding its breath. Then came the roar, a synchronized, terrifying wave of power that shook the windows. 97 motorcycles rolled into the lot, their chrome wet with rain, their headlights cutting through the fog like judgment itself. The motel clerk ran to the window, gasping. Carl's cigarette fell from his mouth. And Naomi, for the first time in months, felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died. Safety. Dean was the first to step off his bike. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just walked forward, slow, deliberate, a storm inside human skin. Behind him, the others fanned out, silent, surrounding the motel like ghosts of vengeance. Carl tried to speak, to play the same act that worked on neighbors and cops and caseworkers. But this time, his words fell apart. Because these men had seen evil before, they recognized it instantly. Dean's eyes flicked toward the window. There she was, a small silhouette framed by the curtain, trembling but alive. He gave a small nod, and that was all it took. The next few minutes blurred into chaos. Carl tried to run, but the bikers moved faster. The man who once controlled everything found himself cornered, powerless, surrounded by 97 men who didn't need badges to serve justice. Naomi stumbled out of the room, barefoot, her backpack still clutched to her chest. When she saw the man on the front line, Dean, she froze. He wasn't angry, he looked broken, like a man remembering his own daughter who never got saved in time. He removed his helmet slowly and knelt in front of her. Rain ran down his jacket, over the Hells Angels patch, over the scars on his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. You're safe now. As sirens began to echo in the distance, the bikers stepped back, blending into the shadows like avenging spirits. They weren't here for recognition or thanks. They came to make sure no one ever touched her again. Naomi looked up, eyes wide, tears mixing with rain, and whispered something only Dean heard. Whatever it was, it stopped him cold. He turned his head slightly, looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, smiled. The motel lot glowed with flashing red and blue as police arrived minutes later. By the time they entered room 12, Carl Denson was already on his knees, shaking, muttering words no one cared to understand. And Naomi Carter, the girl he thought no one would ever come for, stood in the light, surrounded by the ghosts of thunder who had vanished just as quickly as they came. They didn't ride for revenge, they rode for her. Weeks later, those same engines echoed outside a courthouse. The courtroom smelled like cheap coffee and tension. Every seat was filled. The small-town judge sat stiff behind his bench, gavel tapping like an impatient metronome. Reporters whispered. Cameras clicked. Not because of the trial itself, but because of the people sitting quietly in the back row. 97 men in leather, clean-shaven, jackets zipped, dog tags gleaming. They filled the courtroom like shadows of thunder. The same men who had vanished that stormy night. At the front, Naomi sat with her hands clasped tightly around a folder of papers. She was 14. Too young to understand everything that had happened, but old enough to know that silence kills faster than any weapon. Carl sat across the room, cuffed, eyes darting, voice trembling as he painted himself the victim. He called the bikers criminals. He called Naomi confused. He called himself a misunderstood man trying to help a broken child. Each lie was like acid in the air. The judge sighed, leaned back, and asked if the defense had anything left to add. That's when Naomi stood up. The courtroom froze. She walked forward, slow, deliberate, the same way Dean had walked toward that motel room weeks ago. She opened the folder, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Inside were photos, receipts, messages Carl thought he had deleted, evidence of everything he'd done, everything he planned to do. For a second, no one breathed. Even Carl stopped talking. And then Naomi said softly, "He sold me once. He would have done it again." Gasps filled the room. The judge's expression changed from pity to fury. Carl's mask shattered, panic flooding his face as the bailiffs closed in. Naomi turned around, and that's when she saw them. The bikers stood, row by row, in absolute silence. Not clapping, not cheering, just standing, as if saluting a soldier who'd won a war no one thought she could fight. Dean, standing at the end of the row, gave her a single nod, the same one he'd given her through the motel window that night. This time, Naomi nodded back. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the rumble of engines waiting outside, ready to ride again. Not for war, but for peace. The roar of engines faded into the distance, leaving behind the trembling silence of what used to be a place of horror. The motel's neon sign flickered weakly, as if ashamed of what it had witnessed. Naomi sat wrapped in a biker's jacket on the curb, her small frame swallowed by its size. The same jacket that once symbolized rebellion now stood for protection. Paramedics spoke softly. Police lights painted the night in red and blue. Her stepfather was gone, taken away in handcuffs, his eyes hollow, his secrets finally dragged into the open. But Naomi didn't cry. Not because she wasn't broken, but because for the first time, she felt safe enough to breathe. One of the bikers, the leader with a scar tracing his jawline, crouched beside her. He didn't speak. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, the same way a father would who didn't need words to say, "You're not alone anymore." Days later, the news called them vigilantes. But those who were there knew better. They weren't thugs. They were men who carried the weight of their own sins, who found redemption not in fighting, but in protecting someone who'd never been protected before. Naomi was moved to a foster home hours away. Yet every weekend, a low rumble would echo through her new neighborhood. Engines that once terrified her now announcing that her family was near. They'd park across the street, never knocking, just watching quietly until she waved from her window. And every time she did, their helmets tilted slightly, like a silent promise. "We're still here." Months later, she would tell her counselor something that would stay with everyone who heard it. "People think angels have wings," she said, "but the ones who saved me came on motorcycles." And that was the truth. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from saints. It comes from those society misjudges, the ones who ride through darkness carrying a kind of light no one expects. This is Black Response, where the underestimated rise and the voiceless are finally heard. Watch our previous story for another powerful message that restores faith in humanity. And if this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who still believes change is possible. And remember, sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it rides.